You're all set?
Okay, perfect. So it's 2:01. Let's give one more minute just to make sure that people have the chance to. I see, numbers climbing. So. Oh, we even have a person here from Egypt. So
somebody
welcome.
from Egypt. Welcome. Yeah.
That's a good idea, actually. In the chat, make sure it's all panelists and attendees. Post where you're tuning in from.
Miami.
Yeah.
Hello, back to Miami.
Italy. Oh my goodness. Canada, of course. UK. So Toronto. Delhi, Germany, India. Oh my goodness. We have from Serbia, Mexico.
Good.
Hola, sí. Hello.
Okay. Okay. I think we have is 2:02. So even though I like to start at the exact same time, but just giving time for people to join. We're going to start in a sec.
Brasil.
Bom dia. Como vai? Oh, hey, I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, to whoever that was from Oregon.
Okay, so I think we should go ahead. I don't want to take time from Sandra or Richard. So welcome everyone. I am Lola from Multilanguages. And this webinar is part of our Time to Thrive series, basically thriving in times of challenges, basically that we have right now. All of us have some kind of challenge going on. And in our professional lives, like this is not an option anymore. We need to embrace technology. We know this is the future. And I have had conversations for the last 20, 30 years with translators. And a lot of the time, translators may be a little bit reluctant on jumping into the technology portion. But right now, as I said, is not an option anymore. So something that, I'm very happy to have Sandra and Richard with us. We switched a year ago or so from using that we were using for a few years to MemoQ, and we are very happy with it. Some of you in the call, I know that you're working with us on a regular basis, on a daily basis using MemoQ. And we just want to add value to you and share, anything that can be, added to your tool belt, basically in regards to how can you make your work more efficient, more effective. And then I'm giving the floor to Sandra. Both Sandra and Richard have 25, 30 years of experience in the translation, localization, and technology sector. You have the bio on the program. And very, very happy to have them both here. So welcome, and Sandra, you can go ahead. I'm going to be taking notes of your, and at the end of both presentations, I'm going to be asking the questions on your behalf too, or if they see it on the chat, but I'm going to be compiling the questions. So make sure that you post your questions in the chat. Thank you. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lola, for having us. It's always such a pleasure to work with you. And what I would like to do right before I give the floor to my colleague Richard Sykes is to give you a quick introduction of MemoQ for those who still don't know who MemoQ or who we are as a company. So MemoQ started as a company called Kilgrey in 2004. A company originally started in Budapest, and as of last year, 2018, I would say, MemoQ, that is the name of our product, took over the company. So we did a little bit of a change of name, a little change of image, and now the company is called MemoQ Incorporated. Let me just go to the next slide. And yes, Dorothy, we are not only in Budapest anymore. So we do in Bonn, and as of last year, in the month of September, we opened an office in Toronto. And we are 6 people working in Toronto, and I will quickly list all. We have Ingracia Batista, who is a business development and channel partner manager for Latin America, and she is actually living in Ottawa right now. Alessio De Martis, who is our business development manager for LSPs et les marchés francophones, and he is in Toronto. Mugais Jagan here, and he is a business development manager taking care of corporate, also in Toronto. Levente Galbats, he's one of our wizards and solution engineer working from Budapest within our North American time zone. And of course, Mr. Richard Sykes, very well known in the industry, our senior solutions architect, also from Toronto. For those that know me already, Sandra Paulini, I'm the senior customer success manager and head of the North American team. I'm located in Montreal, and all working with our COO, Bruno Bitter, who is originally from Budapest, but he moved to Toronto in September. So this was my very quick introduction of the team, and I will now stop sharing my screen and give the floor to Richard. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, I think you should see my screen now. Do you?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, great. I've got a couple extra windows here kind of blocking my way. So yeah, all right, here we go. Okay, so thank you very much for coming to this webinar today. I'm going to talk a lot from a sort of a 30,000-foot view about translation technology, about the landscape, and MemoQ's place in the landscape. We'll show a lot of screenshots of MemoQ in the presentation. This is not a product demo. If there's time left over and there's some specific questions that we can answer with showing you something, this or that within MemoQ, we'll certainly do so. And of course, we'll be happy to give you a demo offline on a one-to-one basis at another time if you want it, if you share your details with us. So diving right in, the translation technology landscape is huge. This diagram here, or this chart, is from Nimdzi Insights, and it's being expanded as we speak. So, you know, as translators or as technologists, we tend to be interacting with just one or two or maybe up to 5 technologies, but there's lots and lots out there. And so where's MemoQ? Well, MemoQ is in 4 places in this chart. TMS for LSPs and buyers, down here in the translation editing area, over here in the technology management area, a terminology management area, and in the subtitle translation area. But when you buy MemoQ, or when you acquire MemoQ, you don't just buy accessibility to other technologies. Now, one of the most frequent interactions with other technologies is with the XTRF, Plunet, Consultec, and some others for the translation project management and the resource management. But as you can see, as the screen built, there's a lot of other technologies and other areas where we that we interact with, and there actually are more. I just couldn't find them here in this in this little tiny map, but there's a ton more. And MemoQ has the capability of interacting with all kinds of other technologies like content management systems, and we're constantly adding machine translation plugins and other automation possibilities. So stepping back away from the big landscape, I'm going to talk about these various acronyms, TMS versus a TMS versus a BMS and a tent and a cat, and what are these? These first two, the BMS, TMS and TMS, there's two different interpretations. One is a translation memory system and the other is a translation management system. And what is often referred to as a translation management system is often also referred to as a business management system. Then we get into the tent versus the cat. Tent is a term that's promoted by Jost Zesche. It stands for Translation Environment Tool. He likes that term. I don't particularly care for it myself, but he likes it. And so if you read his journal, which you should, if you don't, you should get it. It's internationalwriters.com, I think. You should get his journal. He talks about tents, but what he means with a tent is a computer-aided translation tool. So we've got our computer-aided translation tool. We're going to drill down on that a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the translation management and business management. And these two here are pretty much equivalent. So just think of your cat tool and tent as being the same thing. So what does a cat tool have? And they're all do pretty much the same thing. They look a little bit different, but functionally they do the same thing fundamentally. So what do they consist of? They consist of an area where you content. Often you have a grid like this. So you have your segments of source on the left-hand side. Now you have your target segments. That's the area where you would write your translation there in the target segment side. You would have search results turning up someplace. In MemoQ, these search results from the translation memory and from the term bases and from concordance and from machine translation all show up in the same window here, and they are color coded as to where they come from. So you have a choice of search results, and you can just click on the segment and it'll pop over into the target side. What else have you got? You've got a preview. Most systems offer some kind of preview. Some of the previews are better than others. Then you also generally have a match status. So you can see in this particular example, in the screenshot, they're all 101% matches, which means they are in context matches. But they would be rated if you had, say, an 85% match and it were over here in the target segment, you would see 85% here in this little list. Moving on. A lot of the cat tools, they're in an environment in which translators do their work, but they also have some elements of project management. Now what we're looking at here is the dashboard, the MemoQ dashboard. So when you first fire up MemoQ, this is where you land. And it's got the list of all your projects. And then to get into the translation environment, which I just showed on the previous slide, I would double click on a project, or perhaps from the ribbon, which you don't see in your screenshot, I can just choose open project and that would open up. So you generally have a list of projects that you are working on. Computer-aided cat tools have differing strengths. Not every cat tool is the right tool for every situation. Some are really simple to use, but lack sophistication. Others are really sophisticated at the expense of ease of use. I would personally put MemoQ somewhere in the middle, where there's a great degree of extensibility and capabilities, but the user interface is quite easy to work with and to understand. In terms of strengths of MemoQ, there are three main pillars of. One is, from the very beginning, MemoQ was architected to connect with lots of different systems. What I have listed in the left-hand side is all of the machine translation engines. Oh, actually, it's a subset of the machine translations. They number somewhere around 20 right now. As I mentioned earlier, we're constantly adding new machine translation engines. And there's a full range. File format support. As you can see, there's a big long list of file support ranging from all of the major, the mainstream editing environments, from the frame maker through PDF, through portable object, XML, YAML files, you name it. MemoQ is really strong in importing a variety of file formats. Some tools only import Word format or Microsoft Office format. So if you've got a document that's coming you need to convert it to Microsoft Word in order to use that tool. And that's pretty limiting. MemoQ can import practically anything. And the third pillar of strength for MemoQ is the potential for automation. MemoQ uses what we call templates. A template consists of all of the settings that you might have in a project, your term bases, your translation memories, the people that are involved in the project, the quality assurance settings. All these things can be defined in a template, so they're pre-configured before you go into translation. But you also have the automated actions. So in this particular case, you've got a bunch of triggers. They're in the bottom part of the screen right here in the screenshot. There's various triggers, and then for each trigger, there's automated action. So, sorry, I just said this backwards. The triggers are up here in this part of the screenshot. This trigger here is after document import, and here is the list of actions that you can actually have MemoQ do automatically. So you can create a project, load a document, and if you have it, if you attach a template to it, MemoQ will do the analytics for you. It might then create a pre-translation. It could reach out, it would connect you automatically to a machine translation engine if you wanted one, to bring in segments from the MT, all kinds of stuff. There's everything, pretty much anything you can do manually, you can also automate in MemoQ. So now we're going to talk about how a cat tool would talk to a server. Generally speaking, regardless of what kind of server you have, somewhere there's a server living on a network, and you've got a client on your desktop. That client could be a Windows client, or it could be a browser window. And that client talks to the server either through the internet or through a local area connection. So the browser would talk via the internet or the intranet if you're working internally. And here you would have your translation grid, your preview window, your translation results. I mean, here in this green, you got the matching rates, and here you've got the preview down here in the bottom. By the way, this is a detachable window, so you can actually, not in the browser, but in the client, this is a detachable window, so you can take it over to a second screen, so you can have a full-size preview right next to a full screen full of translation results. If you have the Windows client, it will talk to the server either through the or through the internet. You can also, of course, have projects running locally with the Translator Pro edition. You can create local projects that are just yours. If you have the server, however, you can share your translation memories with other resources working on the same project, or with another resource like an editor. You can even work on the same document at the same time. So you could be translating number 75, and your reviewer would be reviewing maybe 20, 30, 40 segments behind you. So you're progressing forward through the document at the same time. So that can be a really efficient way of working. So the translation memory system has resources that are centralized. So you can have translation memories and a whole list of translation memories. You can have term bases and a whole set of term bases that you apply to projects. You can have rules, filters for importing files, machine translation settings, localization, quality assurance, QA settings, all centralized in MemoQ and applied to projects for all different kinds of resources who are involved. Now, let's talk about the TMS in the context of a translation management system or a business management system. Here you have attributes like project management, the resource management, the kind of reporting, invoicing, customer portal. Now, MemoQ doesn't have resource management in the context of clients. There is resource management in the context of translators, participants in projects, but not in the sense of managing clients. There is some reporting built into MemoQ, but not financial reporting. The reporting in MemoQ is project specific. Invoicing, certainly not. That's what your business management products do. MemoQ does have a simple portal, customer portal, that can be used to order translations and receive translations, but the more refined customer portal is generally done through a partner product. The screenshot I'm showing you here is from FlowFit, which is one of our 3 main partners for translation management system. And as you can see, it's got overdue projects, what's ready, what's in progress, what's urgent, the task list, the projects lists, all that kind of thing. Now I took a partner. This is Plunet. It's probably the screenshot's kind of small, but basically this is the main screen in Plunet. And here you see Plunet takes a financial look. Everything in this opening screen has to do with the financial aspects, reports of your quotes, of your orders, all the jobs in progress, all of the receivables and what you have to pay. So this is a much more business-oriented solution. And MemoQ works in the background. The XTRF or Consultech or some of the others operate in the foreground. MemoQ is kind of the back-end system to this kind of system. Taking a closer look at Plunet, the way it's laid out is the menus are in a kind of a logical order. You know, usually when you originate a translation, you've got contacts. Those would the customers or the resources or the internal contacts. Then you receive requests. Out of requests, you create jobs, quotes, I mean. When quotes get approved, the quote will turn into an order, and the order will turn into tasks. And then after those tasks are completed, there's invoicing. There's a capability of running that's in the product, and then the whole administrative section. We'll take another look at some of those menus. Now remember, this is the front end. MemoQ is the back end. So here in the context, you've got your customer groups, your resource groups. Here is the request detail, the quotes, the orders, all the different kinds of queries, and administration. Now, what Plunet does, XTRF also does, Consultech does, each in their own way, much the same way. The layout, the interaction, the user experience is different from product to product, and the integration is with MemoQ in the back end. So a request would be created. That request would go off to MemoQ. MemoQ does the word counts and the statistics and sends it back to the front end. The front end is used to communicate with the customer. So moving on to a different category, terminology. Most CAT tools have some kind of terminology management. This is the built-in term base to MemoQ. MemoQ has two term bases types. One is built in, you get it when you buy MemoQ. The other one is QTerm. It's an extra product. It's a full-fledged term base, as opposed, and very configurable term base, whereas the built-in term base is more static in terms of what it offers you in terms of capabilities. Here you see we have a term in English. We have the same the synonyms here in French. We've got an area with some metadata about the term, who it was created by, the usage that are metadata for terms. So in MemoQ, as with many tools, with MemoQ, you can save a term to a term base during a translation. Here I've highlighted the source, which is EU, and the target, l'Union Européenne. Sorry about my French, I'm a German speaker. L'Union Européenne. And I've dialog here to create the term-based entry. Here I can set the metadata, the various things that I want to have associated with this term, the term base, and I would click OK, and that term is going to show up in the term base and be available as a term thenceforth. There's also a quick method to do it where you can just press Control Q, and it just goes into the term base without asking you all these questions. Extraction, how do you get terms other than doing them while you translate? Well, there's lots of sources of terms in custom at customers. A lot of times they have glossaries in Excel or other term bases. You can import into MemoQ all kinds of term from various types of document. There's lots of different options to express what is going to be a term, what's not going to be a term. This is extraction from a document or a document set. MemoQ, like most other CAT tools, does monolingual extraction. There's an application or two out there that does bilingual extraction, but MemoQ and all of its immediate competitors do monolingual extraction. Some utilities now. These are my favorite utilities. As a solution architect, I do a lot of work on the actual translation memory files. And I think that anybody who really works a lot with translation technology, and especially translation memory files, and also other like source content files, needs to have some tools in their toolbox to work with. My favorites, regex buddy. Now, what does regex mean? Regex stands for regular expressions. A regular expression is a way of using placeholders, and there's a whole placeholder syntax that will identify specific content within some kind of repository. Now here, you can see in the bottom, there's this is a little piece out of a TMX file, translation memory exchange file. So this is a translation unit. And up here, I've put in the word group, well, the opening angled bracket, the word group, and then the placeholder for \space, and then the letters ID equals, and the quotation mark. So as you can see down here in the bottom, these have been parsed out. I do this kind of thing a lot when I'm transferring TMX output from certain translation memory tools and preparing it for input into MemoQ. One particular tool that a lot of our customers have come from, in their translation memory, all of the metadata, the translation units, for example, the creator, the creation ID, the time, the date of creation, all these things that have to do with the individual segments, they're all that data is in one section at the top of the file. And in MemoQ, that information needs to be associated with each individual translation unit in the translation memory. So I use regular expressions to parse out that metadata and to distribute it to each and every segment in the translation memory file before I import it into MemoQ. So regex buddy is a really great tool to help you understand regular expressions. Great, simple text editor. Again, I use it all the time for working on files. It also supports regular expressions. Here we have a file that's got an ID and in the yellow, and it's got some value that's associated with the ID on the right-hand side. Here's the select target language. That's a string ID, and here's the string that goes with it. Choose a target language. So Notepad++ is really good for working on these files and understanding how the files are constructed. Moving on, Olifant. This is part, if you Google Okapi, like the animal, Okapi framework, you'll see it's a TMX editor. It also supports regular expressions for searching within TMXs. There's really handy things. For example, if you've got a file that's full of tags and you want to get rid of all the tags, you can do it in one fell swoop in Olifant. You can also convert translation memory files from one format to another. And it's just a really, really useful tool. Really simple, but easy to understand, easy to operate, and very powerful. And it's free. Regex Buddy, it's not expensive. I don't know, it's $30 or something like that. So moving on to machine translation, another area of that landscape. Just a little history of machine translation. The bit here on the right, underneath RBMT, that stands for rules-based machine translation. That's when there's a language model that consists of rules and dictionaries that tells how a target language is constructed. That's kind of where machine translation started 60 years ago. Now, about 20 years ago, thereabouts, we started getting in the statistics-based machine translation. In this case, there's not a rule per se. What there is, or a set of rules, I should say, there's an analysis done on tons and tons and tons, millions of words of translations. And so if I've got a source segment that is the grass is green in the spring, the engine will have seen that in numerous times, and sometimes it will be stated one way in the target language, sometimes it'll be stated a slightly different way in the target language, and let's say 85% of the time it's stated in way 1, and 5% of the time it's stated in way 2, and the rest of the 10% it's stated in way 3, then the statistical machine translation engine will propose the one that's the most frequent. Now, statistical machine translation reminds me of a little poem. I think there was a little girl that had a little curl in the center of her forehead. When she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was horrid. Well, that's how statistical machine translation is. Sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's way, 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 way off. Now, in the last few years, really few, like 5, we've seen the rise of deep neural machine translation, where the machine translation engines they emulate the neural networks. The interesting aspect of neural translation is that it's very good with fluency, not quite so good with accuracy. So you can get a really fluent translation that's actually not accurate. It sounds good. If you read it, it sounds great, but it might not be exactly what's in the source or what's meant by the source. Nevertheless, the neural machine translation, everybody calls it NMT, has made huge strides in the past 4 years and is becoming the mainstream. The other downside of it is it requires a great deal of processing power. It uses the graphics GPUs, the graphics processing units, to do the heavy-duty mathematics. And another really interesting aspect about it, with both rules-based and statistical machine translation, it's possible to reverse engineer. You take the translation, you can reverse engineer and figure out why it came out that way. If you watch webinars about neural machine translation, one of the things they will always say is, we can't reverse exactly why it comes out this way. But it does, and it comes out really right a lot of the time. But it's kind of a mystery how it got there. Okay, in terms of machine translation engines, this is again from Intento, which is a machine translation aggregator based in California. They have there's generic models that gives there are trained for a broad spectrum of topics and domains. Then you get the vertical models that are specific to a domain or specific to a language. And then there's the engines that have custom terminology support. There's engines that take a look at your content and say, okay, we think that the engine decides, okay, this sounds like it's a marketing text, and that sounds like it's a technical documentation text. This one sounds like a doctor's report. And then and it'll choose for you which domain is best. And Intento also chooses which machine translation is best. So it'll take your source content and your target language and say, okay, for this content, we think this engine, be it Sistran or DeepL, is the more appropriate engine for content and for the language combination. Pretty interesting what that can be done. There are a few things to know about machine translation. Not every MT engine is equally strong in every single language pair. That's a really important thing to recognize. Here, this chart on the right, this is also from Intento. You can get it. If you go to the Intento website, you can find this chart. It's in one of their reports. So here you've got the source language on one side and the target language on the top, or the language pair. You can see which ones perform better. And there's really a pretty small subset of machine language pairs that have really good coverage in the engines. And this report, I think, is from September or so. And this changes all the time because the engines, they compete and they overlap, and they each one gets better, and they kind of move up, and the landscape shifts all the time. The other thing to remember is that machine translation engines are better at certain content types than others. So machine translation is good for one content type, whereas DeepL is better for a different kind of content. Again, that's always a shifting landscape. Last but not least, all of the types, well, statistical and neural require a great deal of content for domain. So if you've got a great machine translation but no good source content and no good language pairs with source and target documents to train that machine translation, will be ineffective. A couple other points. Machine translation is definitely here to stay. A lot of translators find that scary. There are in that maybe machine translation can take care of the boring stuff and leaving the really more context-sensitive translations, content stuff where sentiment is really important, leaving that to humans. However, post-editing also is here to stay. It's sorry about that. You know, if you want to work, you're going to have to do post-editing moving forward. And my last point is, I think that I'm allergic to artificial intelligence. I think there's just way too much hype, and everybody runs to market their products with artificial intelligence, and I find that not necessarily to be true in the case of a lot of technologies. So looking toward the future, this is again from Nimdzi Insights. Interesting thing, you see the 15%, the green sector, that's the sector of people that are fully satisfied and not planning to change their TMS. Then there's a 45%, you know, almost half, that they're satisfied, but they want to keep up and the notion of changing what technology they might want in the future. And then there's this almost 40% that really are not satisfied and they want to change. So that's a huge proportion of people that have become dissatisfied with their technology. That really surprised me when I saw this. Again, to talk about MemoQ and where we fit into the landscape, also from Nimdzi Insights, they asked their audience what technology is front of mind, is the most front of mind, and MemoQ was the one that scored the highest in terms of being mentioned frequently as being looked at. So MemoQ is here to stay. It's a significant player. A lot of people, if you haven't, you should maybe put it on your to-do list. Moving on, one last slide here. You know, how did we get where we're at? This is from Taos. The industry focus way back in the 80s was on documents, really. And then in local 80s, you know, software localizing. And then the whole concept of SIMship came in sort of in the very late 90s, early 2000s. People started talking about simultaneous shipment. And the integration started happening in about 10 years ago, where you see products like FluNet and MemoQ starting to talk to each other. It's getting better and better. And Taos, according to Taos will be seeing convergence and more personalization. You can find this slide on the Taos website. It's taos.net. It's worth taking a good look at and spending some time over. Really kind of tells us where we came from and where we're going. I have had a conversation with a good friend of mine, a guy named Oleg Spoisaruk, who's a language technology expert, as localization manager at a company here in Toronto. And we were exploring together where the value add is for translators and moving forward. You know, what can translators bring that is new and different? And we came up with 3 items. I'd like to share these with you. One is terminology. New products are being invented all the time. New situations, lockdown. Like how frequent was the word lockdown in everyday speech a year ago? Translators are a really important part of terminological evolution, and will always be, because new terms get invented and they have to be translated and they have to be nurtured. Next one, context, understanding context, creating context. Translators are really, really important people in understanding and conveying context. Machine translation, even neural machine translation that can achieve fluency, it's not great in sentiment analysis. It's not great in context. It's not good in the of human language. We need translators to do that. And finally, automation. Translators are people who understand the process from A to Z. Translators, in my view, are the very best reviewers of source content that there ever can be. I love using translators as reviewers of source content because they strive to understand the context. They strive to understand, and when something isn't clear, they flag it. Translators understand the best places in a project to put in automation, how to achieve efficiencies in projects, and where a human non-automated touch is important. So those are the 3 things where we think that translators are really, really bringing significant value and will continue to bring value to the world as we move forward. Terminology, context, and automation. So with that, the bottom line, thinking about future translation, it needs to leverage robust support for aspects, terminology, context, and automation in order to optimize individual translator creativity. And if I haven't motivated you enough yet to take a look at MemoQ, there is going to be a discount code, and I think Sandra might want to take the webinar back and say something about that. Is that, I hope that's correct, that code.
Yeah.
If it's wrong, you'll hear the right one.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. And I've seen that Sandra has been answering some of the questions in the Q&A section and the chat section. Oh. We still have some questions. I'm not sure if Sandra, you want to jump into whatever you saw, and then I can add the ones that were sent to me as well.
Yeah, let me just go to one that I didn't answer it purposely because it's the one that refers to MemoQ's cost. Want to buy MemoQ through our web shop. The price of the Translator Pro license is $70, but for the people taking part in this webinar today, we are offering 30% discount, and Lola has the discount code that will allow you to get it at that discounted price. I did answer certain questions that one was, for example, can a translator preview the whole text before delivering the translation? And yes, you can. MemoQ has a preview panel within the translation editor that allows you to see an HTML of the document. There are a couple of formats that are not able to show in that preview pane, but most documents will actually show you the actual translated text. There was another question which was very short, but can have a very long answer. And how is MemoQ different from a CAT tool? MemoQ is one of many CAT tools that are available in the market. What I always say is the fact that it has been created by a group of translators. I believe that the logic within the way MemoQ was developed is it can be very easily understood by translators because it was created by translators instead of engineers. So I find it simpler and much more intuitive. So I don't know, Richard, if you'd like to add anything to that.
No, the intuitiveness has been an attribute of MemoQ since the beginning. That's one of its strongest points. Even though there's a lot of power under the hood, which I've got to say continues to amaze me. What you interact with during the translation process is really quite intuitive. I'd say another question here, is MemoQ compatible with the Mac? The client software does not run on the Mac unless you run in the compatibility mode, run in Windows compatibility mode. You can, it will operate there. Browser, MemoQ Web, it can be used in the Mac.
Mm-hmm.
MemoQ Web also is undergoing constant evolution to make it and more equivalent to the Windows client, but the Windows client is still more richly featured than MemoQ Web.
Yeah. There's another one, another question here regarding cost again, and yes, it's a one-time cost. MemoQ licenses are perpetual, so once you acquire one, you're the owner forever. The only thing that we ask is a renewal of the license yearly, and for that we charge 20% of the actual list price, and that will give you access to support with our support department via Zendesk, and that is unlimited support if you require it, and also all the updates and upgrades that come with every year. We have one major version and between 3 to 4 updates a year.
I'll go on to there's two other questions here. There's a request recommended post-editing tools. I am sorry, I can't answer that question. I really don't know. If I were to look for a post-editing tool, as opposed to a quote-unquote standard CAT tool, I would look for something that supported edit distance measurements on a per segment basis, so that you have a way of recording exactly what changes you make to post. The issue with post editing is how to get compensated for it, and there's lots of debate about what the best way to compensate post editors is, but how do you compensate for when a post editor looks at a segment and makes a decision, and reads a segment, spends some time, need to edit it, I'll go on to the next segment. Well, should the translator be compensated for that time? I how much time. It depends how complicated the segment is. There's a lot of gray area.
And that, Richard, if I may introduce another question that was sent just to me, it is, how do I identify within MemoQ that is directly related to the post-editing question, if a revision that I've been assigned to me has been done via machine translation? And you may remember at the earlier event we were talking about post-editing, it was widely agreed that this is something that it is here. Actually, the future is here, and it should need to be compensated by the hour will be the best way. Like, that's something that is still debatable, and still people are trying to adapt to best options. But it seems that the logic is to do it by the hour. So, but again, related to that question, since it seems people are very interested in the MT question, how do you know if you're doing a revision in MemoQ if that translation was done via MT?
If a segment comes from MT, there's a marker at the bottom of the translation results window that identifies that segment as coming from MT. So that's how you would know on a per segment basis.
Yeah, and it will also depend on whether the project manager allows the project to be MT pre-translated. That is something that MemoQ also can block. Yeah. So if you don't want machine translation due to whatever reason, confidentiality, or you don't really want machine translation to be used by the translators, then as a project manager, when you create the project, you can disable any machine translation or external TM or TB plugins.
Yeah, as you scroll through the translation results window, that's that window that I showed that's on the right-hand side, of the segment that your cursor is shown at the bottom, because it'll show, you might get segments that are proposed from different translation memories, because you can have multiple translation memories and multiple term bases and live docs repositories and MT, all providing segments and translation suggestions. So as you scroll through, you can see where they come from. So there's another one about
the subtitling. I think if you could answer that one, Richard, it's really interesting. Is it possible to use MemoQ for subtitling videos with final SRT or ASS format?
It supports SRT format, and you can see the subtitles in context as you translate. There's a special preview application for multimedia files that you can download. It's free of charge. It plugs into MemoQ. There's also, by the way, a PDF viewer that renders better preview of PDF files than the built-in preview window. So the answer is SRT multimedia preview tool.
If you have a couple of more minutes, because I see some good questions here. For example, how are the client confidentiality and intellectual property protected? So if you do you have a couple of minutes to answer a couple more questions?
I have all day.
Okay. No, I also have another call. So if we can take that one on, like I have a couple of the last ones. So if you can take that on.
Yeah, sure, glad to. Confidentiality. Let me think of about how to answer that. As Sandra was mentioning, you can, as a project manager, when you set up a project, you can prevent the translators from using publicly available resources for which segments get sent out into the public domain somewhere, into the cloud. And that can be blocked at the project management level. You know, for example, if you use Google Translate, the CAT tool, whichever CAT tool, doesn't matter, it sends that segment out to Google, and Google uses it and sends back a translation, but Google's got it. So that can be blocked. What was there more to the confidentiality question? I think there was.
The intellectual property.
Yeah.
Intellectual property. That would depend on if you're using a centralized server, you can ensure that the translation occurs only on the server. And if the translators are using MemoQ Web, in that case, the segments go right back and they live on the server. They don't actually live in the browser anywhere. So that's one possibility.
Also, when we are talking about the T-Pro freelance version, that version resides within the translator's computer. There is no transfer of data at any point with MemoQ.
It's also possible, you know, if you have a server environment, you can have the application server and the database server residing behind the firewall.
Mm-hmm.
You can have MemoQ Web, the web server, located in front of the firewall, so the translators can interact with MemoQ Web only, and they would only see their projects. That's another thing that's important to state, I think. When you assign a project when you set up a project in MemoQ on the server as an administrator, there are 3 levels. There's an administrator, there's a project manager, and then there's a translator. So the administrator basically sees everything, sees all of the projects in the server, and that's a role. Then there's the role of project manager and of own projects. So if Sandra creates projects on our combined server, she doesn't see my projects, I don't see her projects unless we are administrators. Mm-hmm. And then the translators, they only see the tasks to which they are assigned.
And they have no access to term bases or any other linguistic resource that they are not allowed to see.
Yeah,
and also to keep in mind with this also the contracts that the freelancer have signed mm-hmm. with the direct client or with the agency, and you know the intellectual property may vary by client as well. So be careful with what you sign into the contract. Yeah,
that's true. Also the linguistic resources like the term bases and the TMs, you can associate permissions with the individual linguistic resources that group-based or individually based, and there are different permission levels that you can allow access through.
Okay, there is one other question, Richard, that came very early when you were started to talk.
Yeah.
And is, can you load your glossaries into MemoQ, your own glossaries?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Through the best way is through Excel, and then you can save out to CSV file format, and actually you can load them straight from Excel. Mm-hmm. You can load them, or if you have them in Trados format, you can load them in from Trados TBX files. You have to have them organized in a way that in a grid where your concepts are, each line in the Excel file is an individual concept, and the columns are the terms and the term metadata.
Perfect.
But you can.
Thank you so much. And I see that there may be other questions that I think I will forward to both of you. I would need to wrap it up to respect everyone's time because it's 3:05 already. And I'd like to thank you both, Richard and Sandra, for giving us this opportunity. We need to, basically continue to work on how we are going to thrive in our profession and use the best tools available. And at the same time, I was speaking with Sandra and Richard before we started, making sure we take care of ourselves before anything else. These are times that we really need to reach out if we need help, and we need to reach out if we can offer help to other people. So make sure that you take care of yourself. And thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
We will
Lola.
be posting this video on our YouTube channel, and we'll inform everyone when we have our next webinar.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Stay
Bye.
well.
Thank you.
Stay
Okay, thank you.
healthy.
Bye-bye.